There's not more information available on the Canadian government's available funding to media that was announced late last year. News has been released on this media funding that was announced late last year. This was a $645 million package that was announced by Justin Trudeau and his Liberal government. So let's just dive right into this article published by thediscourse.ca. Now, as I understood it, this was a fund that was available to media outlets to help transition from their traditional medium into a digital platform, seeing how the traditional platforms are not necessarily doing too well. So let's just dive right into it. Outlets would apply to get this funding, and their application would be reviewed. Now, as it says here, as the article was published on the 22nd, here's how an independent panel will be struck to certify qualified Canadian journalism organizations. To qualify, media have to employ more than 2 journalists as employees and primarily produce general interest news in written format. That should be a red flag right there. What do I mean by that? A lot of newspapers in small towns are lucky to have a newsroom bigger than one person at this point. There are literally now, in small towns, small communities, a newspaper of a one-person newsroom. And that one person is expected to be the editor, the reporter, a photographer, a page designer, look after the website, essentially be a jack of all trades. So right there, by saying more than 2 journalists, actually more than 2 journalists, does that mean it has to be a minimum of 3? Does 2 count, or is it just 3? But that makes this makes it even worse. There are tons of small publications now that, as far as I can see, just based on the more than 2, are now going to be disqualified from getting the help that they very well need. It's unbelievable. Now, according to this article, broadcasters seem to be out. Podcasters are out. And it seems like, going back to what I said earlier, that on the 2 journalists thing, and startup appears that it could be out according to this article. So, if just say you were fed up with corporate journalism and you decided to start your own paper in a community, maybe you're part of a community that had a long time newspaper that was owned by a giant conglomerate that shut it down, and nothing appeared to replace that paper until you came along and you decided to try. And maybe you're making enough to keep surviving another year and then another year and then another year. But because you're not able to hire at least 3 journalists, maybe you could get away with 2. Between 2 to 3 journalists, because you cannot hire that many people, that startup is not eligible for help. It's unbelievable. Publishers that focus on a specific gap in coverage, such as lack in-depth reporting on the innovation economy or the environment, are out. This is very disconcerting. Now here they're saying the discourse may be eligible themselves. In 2015, the then Heritage Minister Mélanie Joly claimed that the approach will not be to bail out the industry models that are no longer viable. Rather, they will focus on our efforts to support innovation, experimentation, and transition to digital. That has I guess I was right earlier when I said it was meant to help you transition from a dying platform to a platform that may sustain you into the future. So I like that idea, but I don't know how with if these guidelines here, the two journalists, if that is the truth, I have no idea how this is going to work. None of the digital media entrepreneurs I know are asking for help to get rid of their projects off the ground. They are just doing it, growing outlets from the ground up on their own by responding to demand. The mainstream media is falling short. Even to the statement, none of us expect the package would provide a windfall for startups. Well, we also expect it would distort the playing field dramatically in favor of legacy newspapers. Well, that's clearly what it's doing. A model that is failing both as a business and to serve a diverse audience for Canadians. Well, I can't disagree with that. Based on what I've seen so far, this is clearly in favor of, I wouldn't just say legacy media. I would say this is clearly favoring big city dailies. Now, I'm sure there's still some smaller cities, a city in Canada about 150 people, 200,000 people, that may have newsrooms that are big enough to still qualify for this. But this is clearly aimed at a big city mentality, where this is aimed for cities like Toronto, Montreal, Quebec City, Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, Victoria. It's not meant for small towns like Edson, Hinton. It's not meant for small towns Whitecourt. Those are Alberta towns. It's not meant for towns that are under 10,000 people. This is unreal. It's not meant like a newspaper in Dryden or Kenora, Ontario. I highly doubt have these giant newsrooms that would fit this definition. It makes me wonder, who came up with these guidelines? These sound like guidelines, like you have this money, but you're trying not to spend it. It makes no sense. I don't understand how this proposal, who heard this proposal and said this would actually help anybody? It just makes no sense. As it stands, the package changed to hire journalists, direct startups. So with Jesse Brown's can't access any support. The national bills can use to fund journalists to create media. Create positive. The Toronto Star could hire subsidized journalists to compete with the Logic coverage. I don't know. This is what I mean. Like, what does the Toronto Star? What makes the Toronto Star worthy of saving when a paper in a small community that doesn't have a radio station, doesn't have a TV channel, doesn't even necessarily have a dedicated CBC or Radio Canada in their area, where their small newspaper is the only venue, the only medium of which they could get their community news. Which, in my opinion, this should have been well aimed at helping those papers if there was going to be such a program at all. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. The investigative journalist Tim Bousquet found Halifax Examiner writes that for his news outlet, plus it mean necessarily putting off expansion plans as the market suddenly. Let's play it. We don't need a handout. Let's have to stick. Wow. It's unbelievable. When I first heard the possibility of the media getting a subsidy, grant funding, however you want to call this, I understand that unfortunately things aren't going good for this industry right now, but something like this is going to make it far worse. I got some feedback in the last video I did where people are saying that if a if a newspaper gets this funding, it will impact their credibility. And quite frankly, I don't see anything, at least in this article, that shows that is even being considered. And I don't honestly see how this is going to help. This is clearly legislation that is meant to help big cities and nothing else. So we'll see where this goes. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked what you saw, please like the video. If you heard anything you agreed with, disagreed with, or just want to continue the conversation, please consider leaving a comment. Anyway, thank you again for watching. Please have yourself a good day.